Dreams of a 4-day work week have been floating around for years. Then, amidst the upheaval to our working lives in this pandemic, the highly regarded Prime Minister of New Zealand made it a going concern. As we think through our new normal, is that a good or even realistic idea for Canada? Well, let's get into that with, in Menlo Park, California, Alex Pang, author of Shorter, Work Better, Smarter, and Less. Here's How, and founder of the consulting firm Strategy and Rest. In our nation's capital, Armin Yalnizyan, economist and Atkinson Fellow on the Future of Workers, and in the provincial capital, John Trugakos, Professor of Organizational Behavior and HR Management at the University of Toronto. And we're delighted to welcome you three to our broadcast here this evening. I want to start by just picking up on that reference to the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who said last month, "I hear lots of people suggesting we should have a 4-day work week." Ultimately, that really sits between employers and employees. But as I've said, there's just so much we've learned about COVID and that flexibility of people working from home, the productivity that can be driven out of that. I'd really encourage people to think about that if you're an employer and in a position to do so. Then our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, when recently asked about this, asked about the 4-day work week could happen in Canada, said, "I think there's a lot of people thinking creatively about what the post-COVID world could look like." Alex, start us off here. Do you think this pandemic has really got decision makers genuinely considering the possibility of implementing a 4-day work week?
Well, I think that the pandemic has shown us that there are serious problems with how work works, but also that things that we thought would be really difficult to implement maybe would not be quite as hard as companies had imagined. I think that the disconnect between who turns out to be a valuable worker, an essential worker, and how much they're valued financially and socially has been a real eye-opener for lots of us. But the fact that workers have been able to, adopt mobile work practices or flexible work with remarkable speed under really challenging conditions tells us that maybe when we go back to business, something like business as usual, that we can maybe construct something better, and possibly the 4-day week could be part of that.
Armin, when Justin Trudeau was asked about it, he didn't exactly embrace it, but he didn't shut it down either. Do you have any sense about whether the government of Canada is on this at all?
It wouldn't be the government of Canada's job to be on this, but other than perhaps to strike a conversation and setting a tone from the top about maybe we need to be thinking more creatively. I mean, after all, we haven't seen a reduction in the average working week since almost 100 years. So it's the question that is raised periodically, particularly in periods where there isn't enough work, as almost a redistribution of working time measure. But I hasten to add that Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, did conflate shorter working time with people being able to work from home. And here in Canada, Statistics Canada says that only 39% of Canadians across all industries are able to work from home. So we've got another conversation happening about who gets to work from home, who gets to have a shorter work day. What do we mean by, is it a shorter work day, a shorter work week, or a shorter work year? These are all really great conversations to be having about what we think the future of work and workers should look like.
And a fast follow-up with you. You said this isn't Trudeau's business because what? Because labor is a provincial responsibility, so it's for each province to decide?
Well, I think, as Jacinda Ardern also said, it's an employer-employee decision. It's a workplace-based decision. But to have the conversation led by the federal level of government indicates what they're imagining the future of work could look like. And yes, you are right. Only 7% of the labor force is regulated through industries that are in the federal jurisdiction. So the majority of employment standards fall under provincial jurisdiction.
John, can you just sort of play this out for us, how you imagine this could happen? Because I guess there's a bunch of different options. You could do the existing 40-hour work week in 4 days, or you could do sort of shorter hours for, well, anyway, I won't get into all the permutations. That's your job. How do you see it working out?
So there's a number of ways we could conceptualize this. I mean, obviously people talk about the 4-day, 40-hour week, which I'm not quite a proponent of. You could do the 4-day, 8 hours per day. I think that data that does exist out there supports that people are more productive under that model. You also have companies and countries doing different things. You even see 5 days, but 6 hours a day. You see all kinds of different models that are possibly out there. I think with the situation that we're in, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is that there is no precedent for this. And so it really is a great opportunity, although the pandemic is a tragic happening for our society. It's a great opportunity for companies to really look outside the box, be proactive, be progressive. And the companies who are most progressive can actually set this up in a way that it's a competitive advantage for themselves and be able to leverage that to make them more productive and more efficient and more effective going forward into our new world.
Alex, maybe you could pick up the story there, because I totally get why employees who are currently working 5 days a week would prefer to work 4. Makes perfect sense. What's in it for an employer to facilitate that?
Right. Well, the companies that I've looked at talk about becoming more productive places, becoming actually more profitable, also having better work-life balance, not surprisingly. Also better recruitment and retention, which if you're a small company and you're competing with, a Fortune 500 firm, is really a significant thing. And it also makes the lives of founders and leaders and everybody else more sustainable. So all of those things turn out to be great for companies as well as for individuals. And then there are, of course, I think we can all figure out what we would do with an extra day or per week. And then there are sort of larger economic benefits that could come to us if more widely adopted, things like sort of energy savings, greater opportunities for travel and leisure, certainly reductions in things like sort of stress and burnout, which are public health challenges as significant as smoking in the United States. So it really turns out to be a remarkably wide range of benefits, both for employers, but also for companies.
We got some stats on this. Let me share these with you folks and with our viewers and listeners right now. There's a 2019 study by the University of Reading in England, which found that 64% of leaders of businesses with 4-day work weeks in the UK saw an increase in staff productivity, while 77% of workers linked it to a better quality of life. In 2019, Microsoft gave its employees in Japan every Friday off in the month of August. The results? Their sales went up 40% compared to the previous year. In 2018, Perpetual Guardian, which is a New Zealand trust management company, announced a 20% gain in employee productivity and a 45% increase in employee work-life balance after a trial of paying people their regular salary for working 4 days. And they have since made this policy permanent. John, I think you're going to have to explain to some of us here how you think people get more productive working less time. How does that work?
Sure. Well, we know that we have a limited energy resource. And so the more we push people, the more we drive them, that depletes them. And actually, you become less productive and less effective. The longer and harder you work. It's kind of a misconception that the most productive people are the longest and hardest working. There is data also out there that says that for the top 10% of all performers in organizations, they work about 52 minutes and take 17 minutes of break. So what that says is they're working in very effective, productive bursts and then taking relatively long rest periods to re-energize themselves. You would think that that could also extend over longer periods like the week. When we think about the cost of stress and burnout, it's in the billions of dollars in our economy. And, people are not productive when they're burnt out. They're not productive when they're overly stressed. And so by giving people more time to balance their life, by giving people more time to re-energize, when they are working, they're doing it at close and either at maximum capacity or closer to it. And more people are doing it from a productive perspective. So this leads to a lot more effectiveness from a worker perspective. And ultimately, I think that's why these studies show the productivity gains that you're seeing, because people just are less stressed, they're more energized, and they're more capable of doing their work at maximum effectiveness.
Okay, I'm going to do a couple of follow-ups. First, we're pretty good apparently at measuring an employee's productivity. Are we equally as good at understanding what makes them productive?
I would contest the first, especially when it comes to services. And I think it's in the eye of the beholder what kind of measurements we use to test productivity. But I do want to kind of, if I'm permitted, go back a little bit on what we mean by a shorter work week. In some cases, it's unclear if either prime ministers were talking about a shorter work week or a compressed work week. And one of the resistances workers have to a shorter work week is it also involves less money. So are we talking about compressing a 5-day week into 4 days, which is probably what the story was in Japan? So work a little bit harder on those 4 days and then get a day off. But you're not seeing a reduction in your income, which is critical. One of the reasons why there has been so much resistance to a shorter work week, even on the part of workers, is because incomes, wage rates, and salaries have been flatlined for decades now. So you couldn't afford to take a pay cut. People have been working more to be able to have more income because there has been no natural wage growth. So that's one issue. And the second issue in COVID, and I'm sorry I'm not answering your productivity question, but I really feel like these points need to be made, that women are most likely to be getting a shorter work week, not because they want it, but because they have to balance child raising. And to the extent that schools and childcares remain closed, it's the women that are doing much more of that unpaid work in the home. So consequently, their paid days are the number of hours they have for paid work is either being shortchanged or they're giving up and saying, I can't do both of these things. I can't do at-home schooling as well as doing a full-time job, and so are opting for either fewer hours or actually opting out of the labor force. This isn't the direction in which we want shorter work days to go.
But I think you actually did answer the question, because well, how do you become more productive? Well, you don't become more productive having to worry about childcare or dealing with aging parents and this
It's a
kind of
huge
thing.
part.
I mean, that's a big part. You've got some stats on this, Alex, don't you?
Yes, I do. But I think that it's also important to recognize that there is a significant organizational dimension to why companies and people become more productive, which is that when you are reducing working hours without cutting salaries, effectively asking people to do 5 days work in 4, what happens in these organizations is that they do a lot of experiments to figure out how to make that work, right? For one thing, most of them shorten meetings. You go from the hour-long standing meeting to something that's maybe 15 or 20 minutes. You think through how you can use technologies in ways that that kind of augment people's abilities rather than distract them. You also redesign the workday to carve out the kinds of time for really focused, deep work that sort of rather than kind of semi-distracted half work. And between those things, that allows both individuals and groups to be a lot more effective in the time, in a shorter period of time. So that, to just give actually sort of one statistic, there was a company in London called Synergy Vision that did a set of attitude surveys before they started a 4-day week and 6 months after. One of the most remarkable things from that was that the percentage of people who said that they had enough time to get their work done actually went up from about 50 to about 80%. So even when they were moving from a 5-day week to a 4-day week, subjectively, they felt like they had more time in the day to get stuff done. And so that's, I think, that's a really revealing statistic, and sort of illustrates how it's possible to reduce work time without cutting salaries. And by doing both of those things together, incentivize people to become more productive, incentivize people to find ways of working better, and let them satisfy clients and customers and have a 3-day weekend every week.
John, let me put the conventional wisdom to you, and then you tell me whether that makes any sense today. The ideal worker is apparently dedicated. She is hardworking. She is the first person into the office in the morning. She is the last person to leave. She puts in the long hours to get the job done. That's the general view of what makes, a worker great. Is that not accurate anymore?
I think it's something that we have stuck with. And, we have this hard work ethic in our society that, the Protestant work ethic idea. And sure, hard work does pay off, but also smart work pays off. And the way in which we work is now different than the way in which we worked when we came up with this 5-day, 9-to-5 work week some time ago. And so technology lets us do different things. It also, while giving us benefits, negatively tethers people to work a lot longer in the day as well. And so those hard workers can burn out. So, I think, we've talked about a few different things already, but one of the things is this idea of being more efficient and companies finding ways to be more efficient in the way in which they structure work for their employees. People are not going to work long, hard hours and be as productive at the end of those hours as they would be in the beginning. So the idea that, if you just work long hours, push yourself right to the end, it actually takes you much more energy to do that work at the end than at the beginning. And you're more likely to make mistakes. You're more likely to not be as effective overall. So working well rested, working well energized is really the key thing to being able to perform at your maximum. And so from a work perspective, we really see that the people who work smartly, the people who work efficiently are the ones who are more productive, more energized, and overall, they become less stressed and less burnt out because they're not pushing themselves while they're at the bottom of the barrel. So, from an organizational perspective, finding ways to facilitate that kind of work is really what they need to be looking at. And something like a 4-day work week, not extending work days into 10-hour work days and giving people their regular pay could be a very effective way of doing this potentially.
Well, Armin, I'm going to put a completely absurd example on the table here, get you to comment on it. But I can imagine there are some people who are thinking to themselves right now, okay, if you think you can be much more efficient working 4 days instead of 5, why don't we get the supreme amount of efficiency and just have everybody work 1 day if working less makes you more efficient? What's the argument to that?
Actually, I think it's not an absurd argument. And what I'm finding listening to my colleagues, Alex and John, is they seem to be talking about a certain class of worker and how that class of worker can become more efficient and work more smartly. But we're seeing already in real time in COVID that people are getting less work hours, but being treated as disposable workers, the people that can't work at home. And so there's two classes of people that might be facing shorter work time. One is the people that don't control their work hours, that are considered essential, but are essentially also on demand. And on demand gig work can be shorter hours that might be flexible and meet the needs of some workers. But we're talking about people that are delivering our food, people that are delivering people that are doing the food preparation, who'd have no control over their working hours. Same with personal care workers. They may find that they are working a shorter work week, but not because they want it, but because they can't secure those hours. So there are two ways we get to shorter work time. Those who are pushing for this almost as a national standard, that globally we work smarter and more efficiently to be able to do more in less time. I'm down with that. But let us not confuse that with the fact that COVID is going to, especially because businesses are going to see falling revenues in the wake of restrictions being lifted. They are going to be looking for every corner they can cut in terms of inputs, and that will include the number of hours they pay their workers to do their job. So I think there are some real cautionary comments here to talk about what we mean when we mean shorter work week. Are we creating a new inequality between classes of workers when we talk about shorter work time?
Well, that's a great point. Let me put that to Alex first. If you take a nurse or a police officer, someone in the service sector, Uber drivers, hairdressers, bartenders, whatever, beyond taking a big pay cut in order to make this work, are they left out of this future scenario that Armin has just described?
They certainly don't have to be. In my book, I looked at more than 100 companies that have already done this, and they range from kind of creative industries, software firms, that sort of thing, to restaurants, to nursing homes, to factories. So it's not just sort of software people or marketing folks who are already doing this and benefiting from it. It's also bartenders, it's nurses, it's machinists. Now, I think that it's often a little more challenging to make the economic case for effectively increasing the wages of hourly workers like nurses. But it turns out that even though these companies have to hire more people, because after all, a nurse can't do 8 hours work in 6 hours, right? They simply have to be present. The same with police or of other lots of other kinds of care or service workers. When you look at the amount of money that organizations save in recruitment fees, in not having to pay to a temporary agency for someone at the last minute, that these programs actually almost pay for themselves. And then when you look at increases in quality of care, in lower use of psychotropic drugs, in garages and factories, the productivity of workers working a 6-hour shift versus an 8-hour shift, you again find additional benefits for companies and additional savings that help effectively zero out these programs. So once you dive into the numbers, it turns out that these actually do pay for themselves, not just for kind of creative salaried workers, but pretty much for everybody.
John, if it does go the other way, though, this also presumably has the potential to ratchet up divisions and tensions in the workplace between the haves and the have-nots that already exist. Is that a fair point?
I mean, there's, like with anything, there's pros and cons to what we're talking about here. I think what we have to be aware of is that this, there are some, if we're leaving this to companies to do, it's a question of, does it work for those organizations? Does it work for those companies? But on the other side of the coin, when we talk about service work and shift work, they are just as susceptible to burnout and stress, if not more, and a lot of times as any other job. And I think the pandemic exacerbates these potentially. The economic downturn we're going to see out of this, and we're seeing out of this, can exacerbate that. But good companies that will come out of this, I think, will look for ways to even confirm the advantages of this situation and this kind of reconfiguration of work to these group of workers as well. So I don't think companies want to just make an assumption that this only fits for certain workers, but they want to be creative. And they say that necessity is the mother of invention. Well, this is the time to do it. So sit back, reevaluate what's happening, and look for ways to really maximize the effectiveness of your workers. And that will be done, that can be done by reducing hours and increasing pay just as easily as, like people talk about cutting wages and saying, well, that's not going to make people less stressed and more productive. So I think we need to look for constructive ways for all organizations and all jobs to move forward with this.
Armin, let's do a little bit of a history lesson here. I guess it was about a century ago that the economist John Maynard Keynes and the philosopher Bertrand Russell both thought that by the year 2000, we'd all be working as little as 3 or 4 hours a day. Now, somewhere along the way, that prediction got badly off course. What did they get wrong?
Well, what they got wrong was that there would be some kind of lockstep increase in wages with productivity. In other words, in Economics 101 says that your wage is your marginal product. Your marginal product is what you contribute to the productive capacity of the place in which you work. And that has failed to happen somewhere around the late 1970s. And this has happened in every advanced country, but the poster child for this is the United States, because nobody does extreme like the United States. Somewhere around the late 1970s, the growth in productivity failed to result in growth in wages. So you see this huge split in, like, productivity goes like this and wages go like this. Wages flatline for decades. And so consequently, as I said earlier, when wages don't keep up with productivity gains, that means that the worker isn't getting the benefit of working smarter, working more efficiently. Somebody else is, the shareholder or the owner of the company, but certainly not the worker. And so consequently, people have been working more, not less, or at least on average, it looks like it's flat, but you've got some people working harder and longer, and some people just scrambling for any work they've got. And I want to use this moment to say, I am down with good companies becoming better companies, becoming great companies, using this crisis to make some workplaces dream workplaces, to improve productivity. But I don't think for a freaking second that the crisis is not going to result in more exploitation, because there are going to be so many companies that are having difficulty staying afloat, and they will look for any cuts that they can find. And the number one cut every company uses is wages. and working hours. So I think we are going to have two very distinct classes of workers, some scrambling to find enough hours of work and others being treated like royalty as they should be in an era in which population aging is meaning we're going to have fewer and fewer people in the working age cohort. You better be treating those people right. But I don't think that naturally translates to how people are being treated. And I just want to, can I add one more thing about work sharing in the wake of a recession? So John said we don't have much precedent for this, but in fact, we have an EI program in Canada called work sharing. And in the wake of the recession in 1990, its use went completely, it went through the roof. We had over 8,000 contracts for work sharing where we pay into unemployment insurance and we got some amount of subsidy back so that people could share what work was left. And the use of work sharing has fallen consistently every year in the wake of the 2007-2008 recession. We haven't seen the stats since March started, but that has been traditionally a way, particularly small businesses have kept everybody afloat. The key here is it requires a wage subsidy. So you want more work sharing without people losing income. Where's that money going to come from? And that's the key thing. If people are going to be working actually fewer hours, not compressed hours, are they producing more? Are they actually more productive? Because then, if not, the boss has to figure out where that money's going to come from. And it's unlikely it's going to come from the shareholders.
Well, that's clearly the cautionary side of the tale, but let's look on the other side for a second. Alex, do you think there's a possibility that a 4-day work week could help address some pretty serious gender imbalances that are in our current workplaces?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think first of all, to go back to the Keynes thing for a second, there are studies that show that we lose 2 to 4 hours of productive time every day through meetings, multitasking, distraction, various other things. So in other words, it actually turns out that Keynes was right? Technology has allowed these great productivity improvements that are just buried under bad rubble of kind of outdated practices and and work habits. And so just clearing that away allows us if you allow workers the freedom and the autonomy to clear that away, they can make this work. And then as for the the gender dimension, I think we all know that there are these enduring structural challenges with with women's careers, with balance, with managing both professional or working life and family. And one of the really interesting things that happens in companies that work 4-day weeks is that the kind of stigma around working flexibly or leaving at 5 while other people are staying late goes away completely, because everyone is now working a 4-day week or a 6-hour day, and everyone has to work together in order to make that possible. So flexibility stigma goes away. The second thing is that companies start hiring for different kinds of values, right? They no longer are interested in people who can sit in a chair for 12 hours a day, who lack the family constraints that allow them to be there until all hours. What they like are people who have professional experience, who value their time, who can ruthlessly prioritize and know how to focus and get stuff done. And it turns out that as a result of that, they really like having working parents, and in particular, maybe mothers who have been out of the workforce or been working part-time, who want the challenge and the reward of being able to pick up their careers. And so in these companies, what happens is that motherhood goes from being something for which you pay a penalty to being something for which you can demand a premium. And that is a huge shift in the way that these labor markets work, and an entirely positive one.
John, if this idea has so much going for it, how come it hasn't caught on yet?
That's a good question. I mean, I think what we see is that it's really hard for a lot of companies and people to change old habits. And so we have this way that we're used to doing things. And so that's one thing, is breaking out of that mold. The other thing is again, we've talked about this throughout this show, getting companies to recognize that you can get more productivity by having workers work less and paying them the same, or even paying them more and motivating them in that way. That's something that a lot of times people have a hard time wrapping their head around. So I think from those perspectives, we really have people resisting against these ideas, these new ways of working, and also it requires thinking about different ways for different jobs, because this is not a one-size-fits-all solution here. And so the way you might implement this or conceptualize this in different occupations or in different industries would take thinking on the part of the people in those industries in order to make it fit. And again, that's stepping outside the comfort zone that people have. So being able to take that step is really the first key to implementing something like this.
Well, I can see the other side too, Armin, which is, on the one hand, this pandemic gives us an opportunity to completely rethink a lot of the things that we do. And that's why we're having this conversation tonight. But on the other hand, I can imagine some employers saying, look, I've been down for whatever it is, 3 months, 6 months, who knows when we're going to get back to whatever the new normal is. Never mind 4-day work weeks. I need people all hands on deck 6 days a week, 7 days a week. Is this, in some respects, a very tough time to be trying to convince people to change habits that have lasted for a century?
Thank you, Steve, for saying it far more clearly than I obviously did earlier, because I think that is the bigger problem. Look, for the last couple of decades, I'd say actually it's been almost 4 decades. People, as wages have stagnated, as rates of pay have stagnated, and people have worked more hours to be able to sustain their household income, consumers have been prevailing upon their consumer ethos to ask for faster, better, cheaper, more convenient. And of course, that's what bosses always want. Employers always want faster, better, cheaper, more convenient. So there's this conflation here. And, as there are fewer sight lines for people to get back to work, because we're going to be losing some measurable part of the business ecosystem on the other side of COVID, the longer it goes on. So as workers, we're also looking for anything that is going to give us a chance to work. So you've got employers, consumers, and workers all looking for on-demand work that is cheaper, better, faster, more convenient. I see the rise of the gig economy in the wake of this. And can I just say, it's troubling to me as an economist because we measure it very poorly. Statistics Canada essentially does not measure it in any meaningful way. So we cannot be monitoring how it is changing in real time through the pandemic, pre-pandemic, through the pandemic, and post-pandemic. But all the economic forces that are at play will mean there will be a measurably greater number of people that have less control over their working time. And those people will be color-coded, and they will be income classed as poorer and people of race and recent immigrants, as well as more women. That is what we saw going into COVID. So I love the idea that some people are going to be doing better, and they will. Some people will be far more clairvoyant about what the work-life balance means and how it can literally pay for businesses. But I fear that the greater dynamic is going to be shorter work weeks for sure, but not because anybody is making more money or having more control over their lives. And I think that's the real cautionary tale we should all be working on together.
That's our time on this, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. That was Armin Yalnizyan, the Atkinson Fellow on the Future of Workers, and she is bookended in that shot there by Alex Pang. You can read more of his work in Shorter, Work Better, Smarter, and Less, and Here's How. And John Trigakos from the University of Toronto. It's great to have all three of you on TVO tonight. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.